Thank you for being early. I hope you're having a good start to your week and are ready to pick up some new insights from today's Lunch and Learn Masterclass. So, in view of time, let's begin. Welcome to Masterclass Experience Series brought to you by HeadHunt in partnership with Kaplan Higher Education Institute. My name is Tammy. Broadcasting live, we have with us Dr. Krishna Rajulu, who will be sharing on the topic of the future of leading. Now, before I hand over the time to our speaker, please note that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type in your questions at any time during the presentation. Please also note that we will be conducting a feedback poll at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'll now pass the time to Dr. Krishna. Dr. Krishna, over to you, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I will take the next, I suppose, 40 to 45 minutes to give you a snapshot understanding about leadership and why leadership has become even more essential in our environment today. This is pretty much a summary of what we tend to cover in our program offered within Kaplan. And you would find that it deviates from a more traditional approach to dealing with leadership and dealing with people within the organization. So without any delay, let me progress. Right. Now, this has been one of the most challenging questions that has been asked over decades, right? I can trace back the definition of leadership to Plato about 2,500 years ago. And ever since then, there has been research that has been conducted trying to figure out what actually makes a good leader, right? And to add to that, I suppose, complexity and confusion, we have many books that are published about successful leaders. And then many of us try to read these books and try to emulate these people. And I suppose normally we find that very, very challenging, and more often than not, we tend to fail trying to be that person that we can't be, right? And that in itself, it makes leadership a very complex topic, a very complex phenomenon, all right? And as a result, you would find that, in fact, if you were to research on leadership, you'd find that there are hundreds and thousands of articles that has been written about leadership, literally, all right? And is assumed to be one of the most used, most talked about, and I suppose most researched topic in any other discipline. Although it's indicated in management studies, I also believe in any other discipline, all right? And to try to gravitate towards a particular definition of leadership in itself, it's also very challenging because many people tend to have many views about what leadership should entail and what makes a good leader, right? And then you would find there are traditional views where distinctions are made between leadership and management, right? My stand over here and my point has always been the fact that every leader needs to manage and every manager eventually needs to lead. All right. And in that respect, both are about leading, both are about managing. So when we talk about leadership, it is not just about, leading a group of people or steering a company towards a particular direction based on the vision that has been set, or at the end of the day, focusing on dealing with chaos within the organization and trying to find a sense of stability within the organization to try to achieve those tactical goals or objectives. But it's more about dealing with people. And that is the major stance that is taken in this approach towards leadership. All right. So as a result, you would find, and if you were to attend traditional courses on leadership, you are going to be bombarded with tons of theories on leadership, right? And I'm sure there are many of you here who are in this session today would have been exposed to many types of leadership theories, many perspectives towards leadership, and the list goes on. I mean, Thomas Carlyle, somewhere in 1840, came up with what is called the great man theory that started off the original school of thought that was very much linked towards traits and personality, right? And in this respect, I mean, again, to be, it's hard to be politically correct if I were to pretty much quote him, and he published it and called it the great men theory, right? And there it itself, a debate started on the basis of whether leadership is taught or leadership can be learned, or leadership is nature, nurtured or nature, all right? And to actually make it even more controversial, the title was the great men theory, which tended to assume that only males can be leaders and the other gender may not be. But that in itself was eventually questioned. And then eventually you would find that the school of thought started moving towards behavior. And then Fred Fiedler came up with the perspective of task versus relationship orientation. And then that created another string of schools, which goes on till today in terms of research and publications. Then you'd find there is this element of Percy Blanchard coming up with situational leadership. And then the more, I suppose, contemporary leadership theories that began in the 80s started looking at transactional, transformational, charismatic, and then servant leadership that Robert Greene came up with. That pretty much was silenced by many critics, but started cropping up again in the last 10 to 15 years because of many of these complexities that we have been dealt with, many of these issues and challenges that we have been encountering, all right? But one thing is certain, if you were to take a look at all these leadership theories, and there are many more, I've just listed just a handful of it over here, and there are many more out there, but all of them tends to have one particular focus, and that is relationship. So at the end of the day, if we were to, I suppose, identify a particular link between all the theories that are out there, and even modern theories on spiritual leadership, ethical leadership, moral leadership, strategic leadership, you would find that almost everywhere there is that link where it is about a relationship. It's a relationship between the leader and a relationship between the employee or the follower, all right? Then you'd find that over the last few years, there has been another interesting development in the study of leadership, and that is very much focusing on followership, right? So with that in mind, I would like to take our attention more towards dealing with our current situation, all right? And our current situation on a global platform is dealing with unprecedented level of volatility. We don't know what is going to happen next, right? And as a result, it's no longer just about dealing with risk, it's about dealing with uncertainty. And the saying goes, as cliche as it sounds, the only certainty in the world today is uncertainty and the level of complexity. Now, complexity, I tend to make this distinction as well between complexity and complicated, complicated because many parts come to play with each other, and every part eventually needs to be, managed in a level of stability so that things works. And if something goes wrong, it's a matter of dealing with, assigning the right individuals and going through the process and eventually finding where the fault lies and then taking the rightful action to deal with that fault. And eventually you'd find the system starts operating again. Complexity, the problem with complexity is, in fact, it is referred to as a wicked problem. A wicked problem because it's very, very hard to define the challenges that we are facing. And it's even more impossible dealing with it, utilizing our current repertoire of knowledge, our current repertoire of experience to deal with it. All right. And that's where you'd find we are no longer dealing with complicated issues. We are no longer dealing with complicated environment. We are actually dealing with a highly complex environment that creates a greater level of ambiguity. All right. Why? Because our societies are changing, right? Globalization has created an environment that has become highly interconnected. All right. And that level of interconnectedness was already experienced in the 2008 global financial crisis, and I suppose you are pretty familiar with that. And then in the last 2 to 3 years, we've been dealing with the COVID situation, and everything has become very fluid. No country has been spared, no organization has been spared, no individuals has been spared. And as a result, it has created, again, I like to use the word, it has actually injected steroid into changes that we are dealing with, and the changes are fast and furious and really, really quick. All right. As a result, our markets are changing, our market requirements are shifting, our customers have now changed a lot. Their behaviors have changed, their mental models have changed, their habits are changing, and the list goes on. And today, I mean, this is a kind of lecture, even if I'm giving it to a public, I would have done it standing in front of a rostrum and facing you and you facing me, and we could have had that opportunity. But we are doing this via technology, and this is, I suppose, what reimagining is all about, what the new normal that is being discussed about as well, right? Which brings us to the point that it is time that we start changing the way we are operating. It is time we start changing the way we look at things, we view things, we perceive things. It is important that our current values, our mental models, our strategies, our goals, our behaviors, our habits needs to be questioned. All right. It is time that we need to clarify that. And that in itself, it's where leadership becomes a lot more important today. It is not about what it is not what about, Steve Jobs have done before or Bill Gates have done before. It is not about that. It is about what do we need to do next. It is about how do we deal with these complexities? How do we deal with this dynamism? How do we deal with this problem? Can we deal with this as leaders, as managers, operating independently and trying to have this and operate with this belief system that it is our job to come up with decisions. It is our job to deal with these issues and then eventually direct people to do what they need to do. And that's pretty much one of the definition of one part of the traditional definition of leadership is about coming up with that vision and eventually directing people towards achieving that vision. So you become the captain of the ship. And as a result, you pretty much are the only one who needs to steer the ship, or in fact, with a suite of management, with a few people to make this decision. Is this enough today to deal with the problems, right? And I can tell you right now that of the original Fortune 500 companies in the 70s, there are roughly about 50 of them who are still existing. All right. And in fact, studies have shown the manner in which in the last 20, 25 years, the way companies have come and gone, the lifespan of an organization is estimated to be between 10, 15, 20 years. And that's really, really short term. All right. And then here we are coming up with strategies, coming up with goals, coming up with vision that is supposed to extend to the next 50 years at least. All right. And we talk about strategic intent when Gary Hamel and Prahalad identified the importance of strategic intent. They said the minimum line of sight for strategic intent should be at least 50 years. Companies don't seem to last that long. But then again, Andres de Gea has done his research and found that there are companies who are as old as 600-700 years. All right. And if they can last that long, and quite a number of them have been found in places like Japan and even in places like US, 200-300-year-old companies, then the lifespan of companies cannot be just 10 years. Lifespan of companies cannot just be 20 years, right? In fact, today organization is being compared to a living organism, right? It has to evolve, it has to adapt. And if I were to take Darwinism perspective in terms of evolution, the organism that survives and the organism that thrives are organism that learns to adapt, all right? And it's not the adaptation in terms of a complete shift or a complete change, is that 2% difference that has made the whole organism thrive. And that's pretty much the difference between us as human beings and apes, and we thrive in this environment. And as a result, this is pretty much the kind of thinking that needs to come within organization. All right. So if we want to talk about leadership, the view and the approach taken over here is about dealing with adaptation. All right. And Ronald Heifetz refers to this as adaptive leadership, right? And it's all about dealing with changes. It's all about dealing with that change. But dealing with change means we need to learn something new. In fact, I always said this, that learning is about unlearning, all right? We don't learn unless we learn to unlearn what we have already learned. And to do that means we must create that capability to learn. In fact, we all have that capacity to learn. It's not that we do not have the capacity. All of us have got the capacity to learn. But the challenge over here when it comes to learning is not the copious amount of literature that is out there. It is not the amount of complexities that you need to deal with, because that is going to be part and parcel of our life. And that's not going to change. In fact, I believe it's not going to get any easier in this world. I don't think it's going to get less complex. I just believe it's going to be more complex. To deal with that means we need to create that capability. And that capability in terms of learning has to come with challenging ourselves. We need to challenge our current views. We need to challenge our current mindsets, our mental models, our habits, our behaviors. We need to challenge that. The problem is when it comes to learning, many of us tends to gravitate towards the known knowns. Although we know there are unknowns, we tend to focus on the known knowns. And the minute we miss out on the unknowns, we are no longer dealing with the unknown unknowns. All right. Why? Because when things are not clear to us, when things are not necessarily within the set of our comprehension and within the set of our knowledge, it actually creates discomfort in us. It creates a certain level of anxiety in us. And many a times we try to find a way to manage this anxiety through creating a higher level of stability, all right? And as a result, we tend to miss out on these unknowns. And the minute we miss out on the unknowns, then the unknown unknowns will never be learned, all right? And we are constantly oscillating within the knowledge that we already possess. All right. That's why I like this saying, I know I'm intelligent because I know nothing. And that is one of the most important starting point of learning. Later, I will quickly touch upon some of the key, I wouldn't even say skills, but some of the key mindsets that we need to create. And one of the most important thing to me when it comes to leading people and when it comes to learning is about cultivating humility within us, all right? So the reason why we need to look at this approach of distributed leadership, as I've already identified earlier, we tend to stick with knowledge that we already know. And any new knowledge that comes has to be part of that, the schema of the knowledge that is already, that we already possess, right? But that's not learning. Learning is about creating disruption. Learning is about, it's not reaffirming what we know. It is more in terms of disrupting our knowledge so that we are in a better place to realize how much we don't know, right? And if we are led by individuals within the organizations who believe, and mind you, I think this is one of the biggest, another key challenge in the organization. And this is very much pertaining to the belief system that we tend to operate within the organization. And I don't think it is a I don't think it is a deliberate attempt, but this has been pretty much the culture in the organization that we have cultivated over decades. All right. And what I'm referring to is the belief where leaders believe, managers believe that it is their job to decide, it is their job to determine what would be the best action, what would be the best move that needs to be made. And then it is their responsibility, they need to be accountable largely to the decision that has to be made. And this puts that high level of pressure on managers and leaders to come up with decisions to direct their subordinates, the people under them. All right. And this is pretty much there because I mean, every manager in the organization, I believe every leader in the organization has gone there because they have performed, right? They have demonstrated, exhibited their ability to perform. And that's the reason why they are there. So now it's about keeping that position. It's about keeping that belief that has been created within the organization. And to add to that pressure, we are also expected as leaders by individuals to give them the direction. All right. And this in itself has become a vicious cycle where people on the ground expect the leaders to decide, and the leaders are under pressure to make that decision. And eventually, this decision could be flawed. I mean, in fact, how do we know it is not flawed? How do we know it is not based on high levels of limitation? How do we know it is based on a perception that is pretty much influenced by your own current belief, pretty much influenced by the current mindset, pretty much influenced by the current needs, the current wants? And instead of looking at what needs to be done, we may end up losing out on that opportunity. We may, even worst of all, we may end up losing out on identifying that challenge, identifying that danger that is probably lurking around the corner. All right. And of course, there has been cases where individuals who have led organization and led to its downfall. Why? Because of nefarious reasons, because of selfish reasons, right? And how do we know that when leaders tell us to do what we are expected to do, it is not based on that selfish approach. It is not based on that limitation. All right. And individuals alone cannot make this call anymore. It is not about just dealing with the making that decision and the traditional approach to making the decision, where if you take a look at, I mean, for me to very quickly summarize, it's about a problem, identify the problem, come up with a solution, then craft an approach or a strategy, and then implement it, and then evaluate it. And then if it doesn't necessarily work, go and relook at the strategy in itself, but never question on what data that we eventually chose. Never question whether the data that we chose was wrong in the first place or was flawed in the first place, right? And that means we can't make decisions alone. And that in itself, it's what distributed leadership is all about. One of the key fundamental perspective of distributed leadership is getting more people involved, right? Getting more people involved on the basis of the fact that, as I said, I must have that humility, that realization that I do not know enough. And to know enough means I need other people's view. And to get other people's view means I got to harness this knowledge. So adaptive leadership, distributed leadership, it's about mobilizing people. It's about bringing people together so that we can cultivate and create collective intelligence. All right. And there is a lot of stuff that goes around on the basis of organizational learning, organizational wisdom, learning organization. But my question has always been, how much of this is actually practiced within the organization, or it is just simply a lip service? All right. For example, one of the, and this is not rocket science, if you were to take a step back and reflect on your own learning journey over the years as a individual, as as a husband or as a father, a mother, or as a employee, as a manager, throughout your journey, you realize that 70% of our learning has come through making mistakes. But how often are we forgiven for making that mistake? In fact, how often are we celebrated for making that mistake? Because that's where learning eventually occurs. So distributed leadership, I mean, I've been given 40 minutes to have a quick discussion on this. It's a very complex issue as well in itself, but it is actually not that challenging if we start cultivating new habits. All right. But it is all about that. It is about an iterative approach towards learning. It's about discovery. It's about experimentation, because this approach towards iteration, discovery, experimentation are absolutely needed today if we want to deal with the issues that are out there. All right. And if we want to deal with that issue and we want to go through this process of learning, then we must create a safe space within the organization to allow learning to occur. All right. And that is pretty much where adaptive leadership, distributed leadership perspective comes in. All right. And if you were to now research on this a lot more, you would find over the last 4 to 5 years, this is where the study of leadership is moving towards to, more because this has been seen to be a lot more critical. And some of the most successful companies have augmented an approach within the organization where they create this environment where learning occurs. All right. So keeping that in mind, this is pretty much, I suppose, in a nutshell, the whole gamut of what distributed leadership is all about, of what adaptive leadership is all about. It's about change. We are dealing with change. All right. And change, again, is the only constant that we are dealing with. But to manage change means we need to get more people to understand the need to deal with change. All right. And that means we need to cultivate the right set of wisdom. Right. And wisdom over here is not about, looking at an individual level. Wisdom over here is more about, cultivating collective intelligence. All right. And you'd find that when we look at elements of distributed leadership, the capabilities are all about cultivating an environment for learning where collective intelligence can eventually be practiced. And that collective intelligence and mobilizing the people pretty much falls into the elements of sense making. All right. And to give you a very quick aspect of one of these capabilities in terms of sense making, we can't sense make of the environment alone. All right. And sense making is a continuous process. And if we want to do this right, we need to get more people, because we need more than one lens to look at the problem, because we are more or less able to identify the different viewpoints of a problem. And there in itself, you'd find that learning begins to occur. And the other capability over here is pretty much about relating. And relating is more about how do we bring people together, engage people, listen to people, understand people's views as well. All right. And we don't focus on vision, because vision can be anything. Right. People tend to focus on coming up with very sexy vision, excuse my language, in organization. But sometimes I wonder how many individuals in the organization, employees, do actually care about vision in the company, or even remember what the vision of the company is and what it actually means. And there in itself, we tend to lose out on the opportunity to harness people, mobilize people, link people to the organization strategy. All right. And this is where the focus is not so much on the vision. The focus is how we connect people to that vision. Right. Jim Collins said 1% is vision, 99% is alignment. All right. So it's not so much what the vision is eventually what the vision does. Right. And as part of this process, in terms of distributed leadership, it's inventing. And inventing means we need to create an environment where learning must not stop. It has to be a continuous approach. What are we dealing with? Adaptive challenge. An adaptive challenge, I can very quickly equate that to the wicked problem that I spoke about earlier, because when you are dealing with change, change questions your current position, change questions your current environment, change challenges you in terms of what you are doing currently. All right. And people don't like change. I mean, nobody likes change, right? And as a result, it's about how do we get people to deal with that. Okay. And that is what adaptive challenge is all about. And it is not about the structure, it's not about the process, it's not about the systems in an organization. In fact, structure, process, systems, SOPs, and procedures, I don't think they are wrong. All right. They are all there for a reason. But why don't they actually work? Why don't I why is it that when you or I create a new structure, people tend to resist? Why is it that we come up with even a new technology, people tend to resist, right? And I'm sure many of you here have experienced this either on the part of the receiving end or on the part of trying to create change, and people tend to resist it. In some cases, some extreme cases, you'd find people could, end up sabotaging it. Why? And this is what adaptive challenge is all about, right? You can come up with any structure you want. You can come up with any procedure you want. At the end of the day, it all still boils down back to people. And dealing with people becomes the key issue for us over here. And I'm not even going to suggest that we go through that traditional change process of unfreezing and re-looking at what needs to be done and then refreezing. This is not about that. This is about no refreezing. This is about continuous learning. This is about creating a habit in people where they are prepared to deal with change, preempt change that could potentially hit organizations. All right. And this is pretty much where adaptive challenge comes in, because you're dealing with people, you're dealing with their habits, you're dealing with the mindsets, and you find me repeating that over and over again, because at the end of the day, that's what we are dealing with. All right. And if we want to manage this entire thing, then we need to get more people involved. And this is where engagement eventually becomes very, very important. Right. I do not want to go again, too deep into this. But again, I'm a little critical over here, because I also believe many organizations until today don't really understand what engagement is. And in some cases, I suppose the blame also goes to the fact that there is no real definition of engagement out there as well, other than the fact that in the last 5 years, there has been more research that has been directed towards engagement than any other time prior to the coining of engagement by William Kent in the 1990s. All right. So as a result, what we want is engagement. And one of the things I tend to link engagement to is that proactive behavior. Why do we need that? Because we need to deal with paradox. And paradox is something that is even more obvious today than it used to be, right? Organizations cannot just simply focus on what they're doing right now. They cannot. If they do that, then they're going to lose sight of all the changes, all the the dynamism of the environment, all right, and the key opportunities that are coming up as well. And the minute they tend to lose sight of that, they tend to lose their competitive edge. All right. So one of the biggest challenge for organization today, and again, it is actually quite easy for me to sit here and talk about this, but this is where the challenge is. The problem is organizations are not sufficiently geared towards managing this, sufficiently geared towards dealing with this. Because if I were to take the approach that was created in terms of a strategic management approach, over the last 70 odd years, then you would find, again, there's a standard approach in terms of strategic management, which is very, very much linked to the decision-making process that I said earlier. And it takes a very linear approach, right? The problem with the traditional strategic management approach or strategic planning approach it operates on the assumption that we are still dealing with an environment that is relatively stable. We are still dealing with an environment where you are able to more or less predict the future. We are dealing with an environment where your goals can be easily met, easily measured. But in practice, I'm sure many of you would have realized that this is not necessarily true, because we are constantly shifting, we are constantly changing, we are constantly evolving, we are constantly morphing. All right. And that's pretty much what your planning would have gone through. In fact, we are in the second month of the year, and I may not want to put this, in an absolute term, but I'm sure many of you have been dealing with changes over and over again. All right. And that is pretty much what paradox is all about. Paradox is finding a way to deal. It's not an either or situation. You need to, and it's essential today that you deal with the current challenges without losing sight, losing focus on where you are heading, losing focus on what is required, right? On one hand, organizations needs to worry about cost, and a good reason there as well, because that efficiency is important in organization, that effectiveness is important in organization. On the other hand, it is also important to innovate. All right. But if you take a look at the requirements for innovation, and you take a look at the requirements for sticking with what you need to do right now and focusing on efficiency, they are actually competing forces. All right. And if you juxtapose them, they put you in a situation where you're being pulled in two different directions at the same time. This is generally referred to as exploitation and exploration. There is a need for you to exploit your current opportunities, but you cannot lose sight of exploring what is coming up or what potentially could come up. And that is pretty much paradox. And this is why a few people in the organization shouldn't be managing this, because that is a very, very highly complex situation to deal with. All right. So as a result, as I started off earlier on, and I mentioned, one of the key things to keep in mind, no matter which theory that we look at, no matter which aspects of leadership that we are dealing with, and in fact, which aspect of leadership theories that we are dealing with, it is important to keep in mind they all move towards or point towards relationship. And that means we need to cultivate human capital, all right? And to give you a quick, link over here, human capital, social capital, and economic capital. These are some of the key capitals within the organization. Social capital is pretty much the culture of the organization, where we are supposedly to share similar values, all right? And to ensure that we collectively try to achieve the economic capital, which is your profitability and growth, the twin engines of strategy for any organization. But you see, at the end of the day, no matter how you look at it, it boils down back to individuals. And that's where human capital becomes important. We need people who are highly engaged, involved, and passionately connected to our vision, passionately connected to our goal. And to do that, we need to cultivate people within the organization. And I said, it is getting even harder for us, and the risk is getting even higher for us. Doesn't matter which organization you actually belong to. And to cultivate that means leadership needs to get down to it. Leadership needs to get their hand dirty. Leadership needs to, start practicing this, right? That should be the role of leadership within the organization. You notice I keep using the term leadership more than the leader, because leadership is a capability. Leader is a person. And that is one of the underlying premise of modern leadership perspective. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's not about whether you are born with a capability. It's the fact that you have the capability to learn. In fact, one of the stand I take is everyone can practice leadership at the end of the day. All right. But do we have the environment for it? So one of the key setbacks in the research conducted, across companies across the world, in fact, Chris Hajaris has done a research on 3,000 over companies around the world, looked at more than 60,000 or 70,000 employees around the world, and found that not more than 3 or 4% of companies actually practice leadership, where learning becomes the key, and what he refers to as double loop learning. And the double loop learning is focusing on developing individuals' capabilities so that you have that higher level of engagement and connection to the organization to achieve its goals, or at least work towards that vision. All right, which means more than 90% of companies do not tend to operate in that direction. That in itself makes it very, very challenging, right? And I'm sure some of you here are probably wondering, all right, whether this is actually possible. But if there are 4 to 5% of companies who have worked towards that approach, then obviously it is something worth looking into, all right? And this is where I would like to, point you towards in terms of one particular approach that tends to appear more often than not is about engagement or engaged individual, all right? And that is that sense of, that passion, all right? And it's also having that ability to operate with a reasonable amount of independence, all right? And allowing people to create ideas, because, innovation is like many seeds being planted, all right? Some of these plants are going to grow, some of these plants may not. And those plants that have an opportunity to grow, we need to nurture it. We need to, take care of it so that it allows the growth to occur, all right? But for that to happen means how many of us are in that situation where we are given that opportunity to question convention, to question the traditional approach of doing things, all right? And instead of looking outside the company, it will make a lot more sense for organization to focus within the company to develop leadership capabilities. And this is where that organic approach to developing within the organization exists. I believe there are many people in the organization who carry a huge amount, a vast amount of experience, a vast amount of knowledge that can be harnessed. But how much of this is actually happening within many organizations, right? And this is where the organic development of capabilities within the organization makes a lot more sense. And I say this because if I were to break, learning into two major components, one is tacit, the other is explicit learning. Explicit learning that you and I can pick it up very, very quickly. But what about people with deep amount of experience, all right, deeply set knowledge in them that you can't possibly codify, you can't possibly share with individuals? What about that knowledge, right? And this is a knowledge, when you lose a staff, you lose the knowledge forever, all right? And this is the reason why that level of engagement is important, because the only way to harness this knowledge, the only way to eventually reap the benefit of this knowledge is to eventually get people to interact, get people to connect, all right, and share this knowledge through that relationship, through that connection. Only then you would find that this eventually shows up, all right? And that's why Takayuki Nonaka identified the importance of that sharing, the importance of coming together, the importance of that social learning that has to occur within the organization, all right? So in that respect, to me, in my mind, I've looking at all the various stuff that are written out there, all the various elements that are looked at out there, these 5 tends to be some of the most important areas I believe that people need to keep in mind, all right? And if you want to learn, if you want to cultivate, if you want to develop yourself as an individual, and encouraging others to develop within the organization, is to start thinking along this line. And as I said, one of the key elements over here is humility, because there is no learning unless you realize you do not know enough. And that humility is very, very important. All right. And that's why in a Buddhist saying, it says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. All right. You need to have that humility. And that humility is critical, because without that, the minute you believe you know enough, then learning pretty much stops over there. All right. And mindfulness is another critical aspect to cultivate, because it is important to be highly connected in your surrounding, highly, the higher sense of the ability to perceive things that are happening around you. And that's pretty much what mindfulness is all about. And you'd find today this has been identified as a very critical component for leadership learning. All right. And it's about getting people more engaged, getting people more involved. And that's what dialectic thinking is all about, is allowing new ideas to come through. But if you want new ideas to come through, then you need to allow people to speak up. You need to allow people to share. Doesn't matter which position they are in the organization. It's not the hierarchy, it's not the power, it's about that individual. All right. But to do that means you must have the mindset to take a step back and suspend all judgment and focus on what is being said. And if someone corrects you, and if that person can support and substantiate the fact, then we must be in a position to accept the fact that when we are wrong, we are wrong. Only then we can harness this knowledge. All right. And harnessing that knowledge creates that, requires that creation of a safe space, a space where people feel sufficiently connected, sufficiently protected, knowing the fact that it's okay to make mistake. It's okay to learn from that mistake. All right. Knowing the fact it's okay to speak up, because no idea is a stupid idea. No suggestion is a stupid suggestion. All right. And people must be prepared to participate in that. Right. And this is where, people have identified, for example, people like Carl Wick, people like Catherine Sutcliffe has identified, and eventually grouped certain organization as HROs, high resilient organization. Who are they? That this is where you find individuals who are very much involved in, who are very much proactive in their involvement. This is where individuals do not sit on their laurels. They're constantly looking for possible problems that could come up from a new strategy that they may have come up with, or a new process they may have come up with, or a new action or a new tactic they may have come up with. All right. And then these are individuals that you'd find that tends to act in a proactive manner, identify the problem, share it among everyone, test run it, share it among everyone, and primarily make this work. And you'd find that some of the literatures from Resilient today is called design thinking. All right. So as I said, at the end of the day, the key over here, leadership is not about whether you take a task-oriented approach or a democratic-oriented approach, or a participatory-oriented approach. There are so many of these terms that are out there. The key skill of a leader is to be the architect to create this environment, the architect to create an environment where you can connect with people, an architect where you cultivate an environment where people are willing to learn, where people are willing to share, where people are willing to contribute. All right. And that is what the safe space is all about. And that's where that amount of knowledge that already exists within the organization needs to be harnessed. All right. We are very, very good at technical expertise. We are excellent at operational expertise, and most companies you find are really, really good in that. What we tend to miss out is the relationship expertise. And that's the sign of a leader. It's about cultivating and developing that relationship, right? So basically, I realize I'm pretty much running out of time over here. But as I said, the key over here is dealing with an unprecedented event or events. And like I said, this level of complexity is not going to go away, right? Are we prepared to not be tempted by our old ways and prepared to open up to new ways of doing things? Okay. And this is where, as many of the sports over there, I'm a keen soccer fan. So to me, no team can win the Premier League unless they work as a team. It's not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And that's pretty much what leadership eventually is all about. Okay, so spot on. I was told to stop at 12:50, not bad. I stopped at 12:50. Sorry if I had rushed through certain things, but I was delivering something that is highly complex and run over over 13 or 14 lessons. But let me go to the Q&A. Yes, Darren, I completely agree with you on that. Leadership is not developed based on theory, right? And that's why my focus here was not based on theory. My focus here was very much based on capabilities, based on learning, based on skills. And I think this is something that tends to be missing. Yes, Jedediah, completely agree. And you notice this is probably one of the reasons why many companies eventually move towards nefarious action, or many companies tend to fall into that that ethical trap, because why? It is all about that bottom line, right? I'm not saying, I'm not saying we shouldn't. All I'm saying over here is we need to find that balance, all right? Carrie, I'm working in a flat structure department. How do I get leadership work experience? In fact, that's pretty much one of the key aspects over here. Leadership is not about leading. Leadership is that practice. And one of the best ways to practice leadership, I'm sorry, Gary. I mean, this is a question that could take me about 30 minutes, but let me try my best to put this in a simplest perspective over here. In a flat organization or in a hierarchical organization, as I said, it is not about the structure. It's about how do we get people to practice. One of the key aspects of that leadership behavior is allowing greater proactivity to be involved, because why? The focus should be on learning more than anything else. I don't know everything, neither do you, all right? And none of us actually know everything. And that's the reason why getting people involved becomes important. A flat structure, it is possibly less challenging to do that, actually, because a flat structure, if it's done right, could very well become more organic as compared to a hierarchical structure that could end up being more mechanistic, right? So I hope that made some sense. Too many cooks spoil the soup, and this is where practicing leadership and the leader plays a part. It's about cultivating that mindset in terms of contribution and contributing to that learning portion. And too many cooks spoil the soup, mostly because it is done out of, it is not done out of a process that needs to be put into people's head in terms of what they need to look out for, what they need to identify, and what is sensible in terms of contribution, right? So that's one way to deal with it. I like what you said, Darren. It is definitely foresight, right? Hindsight is probably one of the, I suppose, is one of the biggest culprit in preventing us from learning, all right? If I only had known, all right? Or, looking back, this is how I should have done. The minute we do that, we fall into what is called a hindsight trap, all right? And it's not about, it is not about how it could have been done. It is more about what I did not do. All right. So it's completely two different questions over here. And in fact, one of the key learning elements when it comes to question over here is asking the right question, right? We tend to ask why and then start putting people into a defensive mode. And as a result, the minute we put people into a defensive mode, people try to justify it in terms of us learning from each other. What are my views on the traits of a good manager versus a good leader? Well, Wei Ling, I'm not sure whether you were there at the very beginning. You know, every leader needs to lead, every manager needs to manage, all right? And I think this element of trying to separate these two, it's probably what that makes things a lot more complex, okay? Leadership is not about hierarchy. In fact, the view that is taken over here, it is not about hierarchy. Hierarchy does play a part, and I'm not going to, create the wrong impression over here. But that hierarchy, that formal authority, is needed to cultivate that learning. All right, and I believe managers and leaders both play pretty much the similar role over here. I'm sorry, I need to keep selecting, but thanks for all the questions. Again, I think to a large extent, I've tried to address as many questions as I could. All right, because we do have a time aspect over here, and I think Darren needs to take that up. And I would like to say thank you for everyone for attending, and I hope that snapshot, made some sense in terms of what was being covered this afternoon, and it was something, hopefully triggered something in you, and it was useful. Thank you very much for attending, and I'll hand it over to Gavin.
Yes.
Should I stop sharing, Gavin, or you can? Oh, okay. Should I stop sharing, Gavin?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Krishna, for the earlier sharing. Hi, everyone. My name is Gavin. I'm from Kaplan, Singapore, and good afternoon to all of you. I hope this is the lunchtime. Just give me another few more minutes. I will just have a quick run through about the program offered in Kaplan, Singapore, which earlier on, Dr. Krishna has discussed about the topics on leadership, which is also part of our module in our MBA programs. Yeah. Okay. So I will just go through a very quick one for what is the program that is offered in Kaplan, Singapore. For this, which is the MBA program, Masters of Business Administration, we have two universities offering the MBA. One is Northumbria University from UK, and the other one is Murdoch University from Australia. Okay, so by looking at the slides, you can actually clearly see that the durations for both the program is about the same, which is you can complete between 12 to 15 months. So for the UK ones, Northumbria University, part-time program, 15 months. And for Murdoch University MBA can be done either in full-time or part-time in 12 months. Okay, so the next intakes that we are looking at for Northumbria University is pretty soon. It's about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks from now in March. And the next one after March will be in June. Okay, so that will be for the Northumbria University. And for Murdoch University, the upcoming intake will be in May 2022, and after May will be in September. Okay, so I'll just go through very briefly on the university credential that normally we're actually looking at. Okay, so I just running out very quick from here, which for Northumbria University, why we choose the Northumbria is because they are under the AACSB accredited, and they also won the award, which is the Business School of the Year, okay, in the entire UK in 2015, and been nominated as the University of the Year in 2017. Okay, so these are the credentials under the Northumbria University. And for Murdoch University wise, we have the World Top 100 for the university that's below 50 years old category, and followed by the university are being recognized by the Ministry of Manpower and also Ministry of Law in Singapore. Okay, so besides offering the MBA programs in Kaplan, Singapore, and we do have some other postgraduate programs, which is the master's degree program offered coming from different area or discipline. For the business and management side, you can see we have clearly a lot of master's degree being offered, okay, including the Master of Science in HR, and we have the double masters, which is the MBA plus the HR masters, the MBA plus the IT masters, okay, and coming from various university as well. Okay, so from the education and social sciences, and we do have the graduate certificate in of counseling, followed by the Master of Counseling and Master of Education from Monash University, and we have the graduate diploma in psychology, and in accounting and banking and finance wise, we have Masters of Professional Accounting and also the Masters of Science in Finance. Again, last but not least, we have areas in IT and engineering masters. Okay, and last but not least, you can actually scan this QR code to find out more about our postgraduate program offered in Kaplan, Singapore, or otherwise, I just put in the chat, which is okay, just give me a while. Okay, which you can reach me at my email at gavin.chong@kaplan.com, or you can visit Kaplan's postgraduate program website to find out more about the programs, the range of the master's degree program offered in Kaplan, Singapore. Okay, otherwise, I don't want to take up too much of your lunchtime, so I would like to share this again. Thank you very much for your time to attend these sessions, and I hope we'll see you again in the near future. Thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you, Gavin and
Thank you,
Dr.
Tanvi.
Krishna, for your time. We hope you've enjoyed today's session and will now invite you to participate in our feedback poll. Please give us your honest feedback so that we can further improve on our Master's Experience series. The feedback poll should be popping up on your screen, so please take a few moments to share with us your observations. Your feedback is important to us, so we really appreciate you taking time to complete this. We'll just take a couple of seconds more before we wrap up today's session. Great. Thank you very much for your feedback and for joining us today. This Master's Experience series is proudly brought to you by HeadHunt in partnership with Kaplan Higher Education Institute. We welcome you to join us this Friday on the 25th of February on the topic of Data Modeling in Accounting Decision Making, brought to you by School of Accountancy, SMU. Please sign up early on our website, postgrad.sg. With that, we will wrap up today's session. We wish you a wonderful week ahead and see you on Friday.